Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Elizabeth and I run the blog lifefromtheviolasection.com, where I share my favorite practice tips, general advice, and tech for musicians. Today I want to make a video that might be geared more towards younger musicians, people who are just starting out, but it's helpful for everyone. I'm sharing my best tips for sight reading today. So if you don't already know, sight reading is basically when you put a new piece of music in front of you. You've never seen it before, you probably haven't heard it before, and you look at it, study it just a little bit in like a minute or two, and then you just try playing it and see how it goes right off the bat. Sight reading is really popular on auditions because you can kind of gauge someone's kind of raw playing without any practice, see what their natural strengths and natural weaknesses are in their playing. So it can really help on auditions to see like, okay, with not a lot of practice, this person does this or this person does that. But aside from just preparing for auditions, it's important to practice sight reading because sometimes you'll get in a rehearsal and you've never seen the music before, but everyone wants to try it. So it's helpful to be able to have the resources to play it the best that you can. It's also going to help you get faster at note naming and note reading, playing different notes, and also understanding rhythms and playing rhythms, finding patterns, and just being a better musician overall. So you'll definitely want to watch this if you've never tried sight reading, but even if you're a professional and you're here, it's always great to have a refresher. So we'll be looking at one little sight reading example today. I got this from sightreadingfactory.com, and it is just 2 lines of music in treble clef. So here it is. When I see a piece of sight reading, there's kind of somewhat of a mental checklist that I go through. First, I see what clef is at the start. This one is in treble clef. If you play an instrument that kind of switches between clefs here or there, especially like viola, where we usually play an alto clef, but high notes will be written in treble clef, or if you play piano where there's treble clef and bass clef, but sometimes they could switch, or sometimes you could have 2 treble clefs or 2 bass clefs, it's important to just note what the clef is at the beginning. Don't just assume that it's going to be the clef that you're used to. Then you want to look at the key signature. See what sharps or flats are in the key signature, if there are any. So this sight reading example in particular has 1 sharp, F sharp. Sharps go in a specific order, F, C, G, D, A, E, and B. They will always be in the same order, so if you see something that is 3 sharps, it's always going to be F, C, and G. Flats also go in an order, it's the opposite way, so it's B, E, A, D, G, C, F. That is always going to be the order that flats go in. So if you see 2 flats, you always know that it's going to be B flat and then E flat. So we want to determine the key signature from whatever sharps or flats or nothing from what we see in the beginning. So I will share with you my way of finding a key signature with sharps. So you want to see what the sharp is. In this case, it's F sharp. That is going to be the leading tone of the scale or the key that this piece is in. So F sharp is the leading tone to G. In other words, F sharp is a half step below G. So if you were playing a G scale, you play F sharp right before you play the top G, and then you might come back down again. So the leading tone is like the last note in the scale before the tonic happens again. So we're in the key of G major. But what if it's a minor key? This piece is in major, it has F sharp. We have a lot of G's here and there, and kind of the reinforcement is that it ends on G. Some sight reading examples and a lot of very tonal classical music will end on the tonic note, or at least 1 note from the tonic chord. So in this case, either G, B, or D. Some pieces will be in minor. So we also want to be able to find the relative minor of a key. This is a minor scale that has the same exact key signature as the major scale. So we're in G major. What I do is I count down an interval of 1/3 from the major key, and that is the name of the minor scale. So we're in G major, we want to count down 1/3, F sharp, E. E minor is our minor key. This one is not an E minor. We only really play E's as passing tones, which means we just like pass right by them. They don't happen on important beats, and we end on a G. So it's not in minor, but it's helpful to know just in case. Okay, but what if this had flats at the beginning? If this had flats, let's say if it had 2 flats, I go back 1 flat, and that is the name of the key, the major key. So if we had 2 flats, B flat and E flat, I remove the E flat, we're left with B flat, it's in B flat major. You can do this with however many flats you see, except the first flat. There's nothing to go back to, so just remember B flat in the key signature means F major. If you need some kind of thing to remember, F is down 1/4 from B flat. But that's about it. So if we had two flats and we're in B flat major, let's find the minor, the relative minor. So we want to go down a third, B flat, A, G, we would be in G minor. Okay, so now that you've figured out the key of your sight reading, it can be helpful to play through that scale. So this one is in G major. It might be helpful to play through a G major scale on your instrument, as many octaves as you're comfortable with, or maybe you can look at the range of the excerpt. The lowest note in this one is G. If you were playing this on the violin, that would be the open G string. And the highest note is D on the A string. So to get all of the finger patterns that you might need if you're doing this on violin, it would be helpful to play 2-octave G major scale starting on the open G string. That's gonna give you kind of a preview of where your fingers are going to fall naturally for this G major scale. Okay, after you've got the scale, you kind of know what finger patterns you're working with. We want to keep moving to the right. So next up we have the time signature. This one is in 4/4. Most common time signature, that's why sometimes 4/4 is written with a C for common time. So make sure you understand the time signature. If it's 12/8 and you've never played in 12/8 before, maybe look it up if you're just practicing on your own and see how that works. 4/4 is pretty standard, 4 beats in a measure and a quarter note equals 1 beat. So you might see 4 quarter notes in a measure, but either way, your rhythms are all going to add up to 4 full beats. Then take a look at the rhythms that you actually see within the sight reading. Are there any patterns? Are there any rhythms that repeat? I'm looking in this one and I'm gonna say that there are no real patterns that repeat. However, measures 3 and 4 are pretty similar. We have a quarter, 2/8, and then another beat. The only difference is that measure 4 has a half note at the end, measure 3 has a quarter note and then a quarter rest. But they're somewhat similar. If there are any patterns, maybe try clapping out the pattern, or if there are any rhythms that look difficult, definitely clap them or sing them or try them on just an open string or one piano key or just one note on your instrument. After you've seen the rhythmic patterns, look for any accidentals that might pop up. An accidental is a sharp, flat, or natural that appears outside of the key signature within a measure of music. Remember, if you have an accidental, it lasts for a full bar unless it tells you otherwise, and a bar line resets everything. This example has no accidentals in it, so we can't talk about it very much, but definitely note any accidentals. Think about where they are on your instrument and just make a note like, okay, accidental right here, I really have to do that. Next, you want to take a look at the tempo marking if there is one. The tempo marking would be right above the beginning of the music. If you get a sight reading excerpt from sightreadingfactory.com, they do not have tempo markings on them, but just for this video, let's pretend that the sight reading example says moderato at the top as the tempo marking. So moderato means moderately, so not too fast, not too slow. I think of it just a little bit quicker than andante, which is a walking pace. So just kind of leisurely. Don't rush yourself, but try to keep the pace up. When it comes to following tempo markings when you're sight reading, you want to play at a pace where you can play the notes and the rhythms as accurately as possible. So this can be really difficult if you get a sight reading example that says presto or vivace, something really quick. You want to find a quick tempo that you can do successfully without just crashing and burning and just not being able to do anything right. So if the tempo does say presto or vivace, think about what kind of characteristic that tempo might mean. So it could be fast, lively, energetic, anxious, light, kind of airy, any other kind of adjectives that you come up with for the music that you see. If there are a lot of staccatos and it's quick, it would probably be light and quick and kind of buoyant. If it's quick and there are some accents and it seems kind of like a dance, then keep it lively and energetic, even if you can't play it quite as fast as it's written. I think that playing things in tune and accurately with good rhythms is the most important thing. And then, try a tempo that's similar to what it says. But of course, note the tempo so that you don't go super fast if it's like lento or something, or super slow if it is vivace. Then note whatever the dynamic is, or any dynamic markings or any changes that there might be. This one just says mezzo piano at the beginning and it stays that way. Then look for any articulation changes like staccato or legato. Look for slurs, accents, sforzandos, things like that. See if there are any of those anywhere and always aim for those notes, especially if they're accents. Like aim for that note, that's the most important. Then you can come away from ones that are not accented. So by now, I think you've got a good overview of the actual excerpt, and you've probably noted really anything that is going on in here. So the next step, I think, is to go through it mentally, kind of sing through it in your head, imagine how it's going to feel to play it on your instrument and what you're going to need to do to play it successfully. Go through the entire thing. Don't just skim, don't just think like, okay, I got it. Actually go through, imagine you're playing it like note by note. Then if you want another step, you can try playing it on piano if you've got good piano skills, and then take it over to your instrument. If you play piano, then disregard that. Or you can try singing it instead if you're really comfortable with your voice, and if you give yourself a starting note if you need one. But after that, the next step is to just try it on your instrument. Think of a very steady tempo and imagine the hardest measure in this piece, the one that's likely to give you the most trouble. Think, okay, how fast or slow do I need to play this measure? And then base the tempo at the beginning around that measure. Unless there are tempo changes in the sight reading, then of course, do what you need to do to get the right starting tempo at the beginning. So that's basically kind of the overview of how you should practice sight reading. If you're doing this just by yourself to get better at it, there are very little or no stakes involved. So take as much time as you need, do as many steps as you need to, try as many things as you need to, and then get into it. The more and more sight reading that you do, the faster you're going to get at this process and the more accurate you will become. It's very difficult and probably scary at first, but just keep trying it in low stakes, no stress situations on your own, and you're gonna get really good at it. So if I were to go into an audition and I only had 30 seconds to a minute to look at something, I go through this checklist really, really fast. And so it's important to practice this checklist so that it becomes a routine when you're sight reading, so that it just happens instantly when you're in a high stress environment. So for me, if I look at this in an audition, I go, okay, treble clef, G major, just F sharp, 4/4. Mezzo piano, let's say moderato. Any rhythms that look similar? Not really, but we do have a quarter and then 2/8 often. The highest note is D, and it goes down a lot to the G string, and then from the G string it kind of goes up and then settles around there again. Okay, I'm gonna think through this in my head. Do all that. Okay, I think I'm ready to play. That's how quick I could go through that checklist. So the more and more that you do that, the more natural that routine is going to become, and it feels better and better. That should be all of my tips for sight reading. I hope that this is helpful for you. Try practicing sight reading on your own in a low stress environment, just because that's gonna help you get really, really good at it, and you'll feel confident and ready if you ever have to do it in an audition or in a rehearsal or somewhere where the stakes are a little bit higher. If you do want to use sightreadingfactory.com to generate excerpts, you can choose your exact instrument, or you can choose just rhythm, and then there are different levels of sight reading. Start at a low level, see what that is like, and then you can bump it up from there and there. If I'm giving someone sight reading from like a book or something, I will usually go 1 or 2 levels below where they're usually learning pieces, because we want something that is somewhat simple, something that you could probably practice and get really good at in like 10 to 30 minutes. We don't want it to be like a concerto where you'd have to work for weeks or months to get it right. Something that's doable and easily attainable is good for sight reading. So start kind of on the low side and then test it out. See, okay, this is super simple. I want to bump it up a little bit. But within Sight Reading Factory, you can choose the clef, what key signatures it might rotate the excerpts between, time signatures that it'll use, the range of notes, and what type of note values. So there's a lot that you can play around with, and it just generates random things. They're usually not super melodic or super pretty. They're usually kind of weird to the ears, which is good and bad. It's very good practice, but it's hard to know if you're doing it right because it might not sound beautiful or amazing. But it's a great place to get lots and lots of sight reading examples. If you have a sight reading tip that you swear by, please leave it in the comments because it'll help a lot of people. I also like to know so that I can get better, and I love sharing new tips and ideas with my own students to help them get better right off the bat. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. I post new videos every other Sunday at noon Eastern Time. Thanks for watching.